What if I told you that the reason you feel tired all the time isn't physical? It's emotional. Not from doing too much, but from caring too much. About what they think, about how they see you, about fixing things that were never yours to fix. This invisible weight, overthinking, emotional detachment gone wrong, constant self-editing, it's draining your focus, peace, and clarity. You're not just tired, you're emotionally overdrawn. And here's the brutal truth. Most of the things you obsess over won't even matter tomorrow. Most of the people you're trying to please don't even notice. And the version of you that keeps sacrificing peace for approval? He's burning out. That's where this video steps in, drawing on timeless Stoic wisdom. We're not here to teach you how to stop caring altogether. We're here to show you how to care wisely. How to distinguish what's truly yours to control, your thoughts, your actions, from the noise outside. To stop bleeding attention into things that never deserved your energy in the first place. You'll learn how applying Stoic principles brings freedom through emotional minimalism, why true Stoic detachment isn't cold but clean clarity, and how to build unshakable peace, even in a noisy, reactive world. You're not alone in this. You're just finally ready to reclaim yourself. So if that hits deep, like it's speaking to something you've been carrying, stay with me. Because the less you care about what's outside your control, the more powerful you become. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let's begin. 1. Overcaring creates emotional imbalance. It starts quietly, with good intentions. You want to be kind, you want to be thoughtful, you want to be someone who listens, who shows up, who gives a damn. So you stretch, just a little at first. You answer the call when you're exhausted. You say yes, even when your gut says no. You accommodate, adjust, and overextend, telling yourself you're just being considerate. But somewhere along that well-meaning path, you begin to notice a shift. Your shoulders get heavier, your chest is tighter. You begin carrying emotions that don't belong to you, apologizing for thoughts you never voiced, feeling guilty for not being enough, even when no one asked you to be more. And still, you keep giving. Because maybe if you care enough, try enough, soften enough, you'll finally feel at peace. But peace doesn't come from people-pleasing. It comes from clarity. Seneca wrote, "He who suffers before it is necessary, suffers more than is necessary." The same holds true when you care about things that were never yours to hold. Emotional imbalance isn't always born from trauma or conflict. Sometimes it's born from kindness unguarded. You offer pieces of your sanity to the world, hoping it'll bring connection. And all it brings back is silence. Or worse, indifference. And in that silence, something inside you starts to fracture. You notice how little energy you have left. You start dreading conversations. Your internal space, once clear and steady, now feels foggy, like walking through someone else's storm without an umbrella of your own. And still, you tell yourself it's noble, that being drained means you're doing something right. But that's the trick of emotional imbalance. It feels like virtue. It looks like compassion. In reality, it's self-abandonment, dressed in the costume of responsibility. This imbalance isn't about being weak. It's about being misaligned. It's about investing your energy where it doesn't grow. Imagine planting seeds in someone else's garden, watering it daily, pulling weeds, tending the soil, and then wondering why nothing blooms in yours. That's what overcaring does. It robs you of the attention you need to thrive within your own life. And you may not notice it at first, because being needed can feel like meaning. But there's a cost when your value becomes tied to how much you give, how quickly you respond, or how silently you suffer. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." The same can be said for caring. If it is not yours to carry, let it go. If it does not nourish your clarity or protect your peace, step back. Letting go doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you stop leaking yourself for them. It means you learn to tell the difference between connection and obligation. It means you understand that empathy without boundaries becomes erosion, the erosion of self, of strength, of your ability to stand still in a chaotic world. Here's what they don't teach you. The more you overcare, the less you are truly seen. Because your energy becomes invisible the moment it becomes expected. What was once a gift turns into a given. and you become resentful, quietly, bitterly, while still smiling on the outside. But here's the shift. When you begin to notice the imbalance, you can reclaim it. You can start small. A pause before you say yes, a breath before you respond. A journal entry at the end of the day asking one honest question: did I betray myself to make someone else comfortable today? And if the answer is yes, that's not failure. That's awareness. And awareness is the beginning of alignment. From there, the path clears. You learn that not every emotion needs your attention, that your presence is sacred, not disposable, that silence is sometimes more powerful than explanation. You learn how to stand in a room and not reach to fill the space, how to witness someone's discomfort without making it your own. And most importantly, you learn that you can be a good person, a deeply caring, wise, compassionate human, and still say, "This is not mine to carry." That phrase becomes your shield, not one built from walls but from discernment. You don't have to fight anymore. You don't have to explain. You don't have to perform empathy on cue. You just get to be whole. And in that wholeness, you're finally able to care with intention, not obligation. And so the imbalance fades, not all at once, but slowly, with each moment of clarity, with each time you choose peace over proving, stillness over striving, presence over performance. That's not selfishness, that's sovereignty. 2. Control is an illusion. Reclaim your attention instead. The mind loves control. It craves it. It builds entire stories around it: who you must be, what they must think, how life should unfold. And yet, every time you try to grip reality too tightly, it slips through your fingers like sand. You try to manage people's opinions of you. You try to calculate every outcome. You try to mold the day into a shape that feels safe. And in all that effort, something essential is lost: your presence. What no one tells you is that the constant need to control isn't strength, it's anxiety in armor. You're not mastering life, you're reacting to your fear of uncertainty. But the truth is, you don't control how people interpret your words. You don't control their moods, their judgments, or their past wounds that they project onto you. You don't control the storm. You only control how still you remain within it. Epictetus once wrote, "Some things are in our control, and others not." And in that line lies the entire Stoic foundation for peace. The moment you spend your energy outside of that truth, you start trading sanity for illusion. Because when you believe you can control someone else's view of you, you've already handed them the keys to your mental peace. You no longer lead yourself, you perform. You no longer listen to your inner compass, you react to noise. That's when life becomes performative. You don't speak honestly, you filter. You don't rest, you calculate. You don't connect, you curate. And the worst part? Most people you're trying to impress are too distracted to notice. You're choreographing every movement for an audience that isn't even watching. So you live with a quiet dissonance. You wake up already editing yourself, already measuring the invisible scales of perception, already anxious about a conversation that hasn't happened. And deep inside, you know something's not right. You feel it in the tension behind your eyes, in the breath that never quite lands in your chest, in the exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. But peace begins when you take your attention back, not from others, from illusions. You start by accepting this one truth. You don't need to control the outcome. You only need to control your input, your integrity, your clarity, your presence. And when you do that, something shifts. People's opinions lose their grip. Their silence no longer equals rejection. Their chaos no longer triggers yours. The Stoics taught that our opinions about events, not the events themselves, cause our suffering. Marcus Aurelius echoed this when he said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's not philosophy. That's a survival skill for a noisy world. You reclaim attention by noticing where it leaks. How often are you checking for validation in someone's tone? How quickly do you scan for approval in a room? How many thoughts per day are shaped not by truth, but by the fear of being misunderstood? And what would change if you stopped? Not everything needs a response. Not every silence needs to be filled. Not every moment needs to be turned into a performance. The truth is, the more you simplify what you focus on, the more profound your experience of life becomes. Imagine your attention as currency. Every time you invest it in what's outside your control, you're spending on a market that never pays back. But when you invest it inward, into clarity, into values, into presence, it compounds, and the interest it yields is peace. This isn't detachment from life. This is recalibration with it. You learn to walk into a room without the need to dominate it. You speak, not to win, but to express what's real. You breathe, not to calm others, but to anchor yourself. And slowly you begin to taste the freedom of letting go. Not of responsibility, but of emotional overreach. Peace doesn't come from getting everything right. It comes from not needing everything to go your way in order to be okay. You'll still care, you'll still act, you'll still engage. But now it's from a place of stillness, not from a frantic scramble to fix the uncontrollable. And that, perhaps, is the greatest freedom of all. When you no longer seek to bend the world to your will, but learn to walk through it with steady eyes, unshaken by its noise, unmoved by its chaos, unhooked from the illusions that once defined your worth. Your peace was never about their approval. It was about where you chose to look. And now, you remember, the only dial you ever had your hand on was your own attention. 3. Emotional minimalism is powerful. He used to answer every message within minutes. Always polite, always composed, always available. Work emails at midnight, group chats that never ended, even that vague late-night text from an old friend. He responded to all of it. And not just with words, with emotional energy, with attention, with effort. His phone was never on silent, but his mind never rested. On the surface, he seemed dependable, even admirable. But if you looked closer, you'd see it. The quiet fatigue in his eyes, the weight in his breath, the way he hesitated before opening a message, like bracing for a wave that never stopped crashing. His name was David. I remember the day he stopped. It wasn't a breakdown, it wasn't drama. It was a pause, long, still, unfamiliar. One afternoon, he looked at his screen, the 50 notifications waiting, and simply whispered, "I'm not obligated to feel this much." That sentence wasn't cold, it was clean. It marked the beginning of something he never had before. Boundaries that didn't need to be announced. He didn't ghost people. He just started responding like a man who respected his attention. He replied when it mattered. He showed up when it aligned. And when it didn't, he didn't force it. He practiced what I've come to call emotional minimalism. The ability to care, but wisely. Deeply, but selectively. In a world addicted to stimulation, where silence is suspicious and stillness mistaken for detachment, emotional minimalism is a quiet rebellion. It doesn't scream, it doesn't convince. It simply conserves energy, peace, and focus. Seneca once warned, "You act like mortals in all that you fear and like immortals in all that you desire." We overextend as if we'll never burn out. We overreact as if our emotions are infinite, but they're not. Every drop of attention you give away without thought is a cost. And over time, those costs become deficits, not just in mood, but in meaning. David didn't stop caring. He just stopped giving oxygen to fires that never warmed him. He started asking better questions. Not what will they think, but is this worth my presence? Not how do I fix this, but is this even mine to fix? And that shift, that quiet turn inward, changed everything. His relationships didn't fall apart. In fact, the real ones got stronger. The noise faded. His clarity sharpened. And for the first time in years, he said he could feel his own thoughts again. The Stoics knew the danger of overinvestment. Epictetus taught that freedom begins the moment we stop identifying with what doesn't belong to us. Your emotions are sacred. Not everyone deserves a seat at the table of your nervous system. Emotional minimalism isn't detachment, it's discernment. It's the discipline of filtering noise without becoming numb. And in a world that begs you to be always on, always reacting, always caring, it's a radical act of sanity. Start small. Choose one place where you overgive. Maybe it's your inbox. Maybe it's that friend who only calls to vent. Maybe it's your own habit of explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Wherever it is, pause, breathe. Ask, does this serve my peace or steal from it? Then act accordingly. You don't owe everyone access to your emotions. You don't have to carry the chaos of others like it's your responsibility. You don't need to respond just to prove you're kind. Kindness without clarity isn't virtue, it's erosion. The kind that hollows you out silently while the world claps for your emotional availability. David once told me something I never forgot. I thought I was being compassionate. I was just being porous. That line stayed with me, because emotional minimalism isn't selfish. It's self-respecting. It's the practice of living in a way that doesn't leak, where your energy isn't scattered across every possible opinion, every vague expectation, every subtle obligation. Where do you stop narrating your worth through reaction and begin expressing it through alignment? Marcus Aurelius said, "Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary?" That question, repeated with honesty, trims the emotional fat from your life. And what remains isn't numbness, it's strength. A strength that doesn't flinch at silence, a presence that doesn't shrink in stillness, a heart that knows when to close the door, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. If you're tired of feeling everything all the time, this isn't about turning your emotions off. It's about turning your self-awareness on. You can still love, still connect, still care, but now it's a choice, not a compulsion. And when you live like that, you begin to taste something rare, peace that isn't performative, attention that isn't scattered, and emotions that finally feel like they belong to you. You've made it this far, and that says a lot. Most people click away the moment it gets quiet. But you didn't. You stayed. That's not small, that's rare. Tell me, where in your life are you learning to care less so you can live more? Drop it in the comments, and stay with me. If this part spoke to you, the path ahead will only get clearer. Emotional minimalism is just the doorway. What comes next is wisdom. 4. Boundaries can look like coldness to others. A man who used to answer every favor, every phone call, every subtle demand with a quiet yes, finally said no, and the room changed. Not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't. Not because he became harsh, but because he became still. It unsettled people. They started calling him distant, different, hard to reach. But he hadn't vanished, he had simply stopped shrinking. The man hadn't become cold, he had become clear. He no longer explained his silence or apologized for choosing peace. He wasn't angry, he was anchored. This shift didn't come from a book or a seminar. It came from weariness, from years of watching his own well-being evaporate under the weight of keeping everyone else comfortable. It came from feeling unseen in rooms where he was always available but never truly valued. And one day, standing in the middle of another conversation he didn't want to be in, nodding at words that meant nothing, he realized his presence had become a default setting for people who never earned it. That's when he stepped back, not to punish, but to protect. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." For years, this man had done both, not through betrayal, but through the absence of boundaries. He had bent so often, he forgot he was allowed to stand. And when he finally did, they called it cold. But it wasn't. It was calibration, a return to self-respect after a long season of self-abandonment. The world often misunderstands boundaries as rejection, especially from someone who once made themselves emotionally available on demand. But Stoicism doesn't teach disconnection, it teaches discernment. It teaches that we are not morally obligated to make ourselves endlessly accessible. It teaches that peace requires structure, and structure requires lines that say, "This is where I end, and you begin." That line, when drawn with stillness and certainty, unsettles those who relied on your availability to avoid facing their own discomfort. The man in this story didn't stop caring. He just stopped carrying what wasn't his. He began noticing those who only reached out when they needed something, who only praised him when he conformed, who only respected him when he was silent. And once seen, those patterns could not be unseen. He didn't announce his boundaries, he didn't post about them. He simply changed where he placed his time, his words, his energy. He left some messages unread, not out of spite, but because his nervous system deserved rest. He missed a few gatherings, not because he didn't care, but because he cared enough about his own clarity to stop sacrificing it for shallow belonging. And as expected, some people pulled away. But the space they left behind revealed something precious: peace. Seneca reminded us, associate with people who are likely to improve you. That principle applies to conversations, environments, and even internal dialogue. The man began treating his mind like a temple, not a trash bin for everyone else's expectations. He began honoring silence not as absence, but as presence. He began allowing discomfort in others without making it his responsibility to soothe. And in doing so, he discovered something powerful. The right people never call clarity cold. This is not about isolation, it's about integrity. You're not rude for saying no. You're not selfish for needing time. You're not cold for not engaging in every emotional tug-of-war thrown your way. You are simply living in alignment with what matters. Boundaries are not walls. They are the architecture of inner peace. And if someone sees your strength and calls it distance, that tells you more about their relationship with your availability than your humanity. Stoic philosophy reminds us that we are not here to be understood by everyone. We are here to live in accordance with virtue, with reason, with presence, with courage. Setting boundaries is one of the highest acts of emotional courage, because it says, I will not sacrifice my sanity to maintain a version of me that keeps others unchallenged. If you're afraid people will pull away when you draw the line, let them. Not to prove a point, but to preserve your peace. The ones who truly value you won't be offended by your need for balance. They'll respect it. And in that space of reduced noise, you'll hear your own thoughts again. You'll realize how long it's been since you've moved through the world without negotiating your energy at every step. The man in this story didn't become cold. He just stopped being emotionally available by default. And in that choice, he found warmth that didn't come from applause. It came from within. 5. The real shift: observing over reacting. Something changes the day you stop rushing to respond, not because you're disengaged, but because you finally reclaim the space between stimulus and response. That space, quiet, invisible, powerful, is where all freedom begins. It's where anger loses its grip, where anxiety softens, where clarity enters. You don't speak too soon. You don't type out that long message. You don't launch into defense mode just because someone else threw a spark. You wait, you observe, you watch the moment arrive, and then you choose. This shift doesn't feel dramatic. It feels subtle, even strange at first. Like standing still while everyone else runs in circles. But it's a kind of strength you've never known, not reactive, not explosive, just grounded. You notice how people begin to reveal themselves when you stop trying to correct them. You see how many arguments rely on your participation. You realize that most chaos only survives when it's fed. It's not disconnection, it's discernment. The kind of discernment that Stoic philosophers lived by. Epictetus reminded us that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And Marcus Aurelius, in his quiet notes to himself, wrote that the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. These weren't lofty ideals. They were tools, practical, steady, repeatable. I once knew a man who used to react to everything. A driver cuts him off, he yells. A colleague interrupts, he clenches his jaw. A message reads colder than expected, his whole afternoon derails. He lived in a state of constant reactivity, always scanning the room for disrespect, always ready to respond. And yet, the more he reacted, the less control he felt. He thought he was protecting himself, defending his boundaries. But really, he was handing over the reins of his peace to every passing moment. Then one day, something cracked. Not from a dramatic meltdown, but from sheer exhaustion. He watched himself replay a conversation 3 hours after it ended, imagining clever comebacks, reliving every word. And suddenly he laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. He saw it clearly. He wasn't reacting to protect his peace. He was reacting because he didn't know how to be still. That day, he began practicing silence, not just with his mouth, but with his mind. He didn't become passive, he became selective. He still spoke, but more slowly. He still acted, but with intent. He began to notice when his emotions were being hijacked, when someone's tone or energy tried to drag him into a story that wasn't his. And instead of entering that space, he paused, observed, breathed. And most of the time, that pause was enough to diffuse the whole situation. This is the quiet shift Stoicism invites. The move from automatic reaction to conscious response. From external validation to inner clarity. From emotional flinching to still presence. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop letting others dictate the pace of your mind. The Stoics understood that peace isn't built in the aftermath. It's built in the space before. That sacred half-second before you reply, before you snap, before you internalize a look, a tone, a comment. That's where you build resilience. That's where power lives. In observation, not domination. If you want to apply this, start by noticing your trigger points. When does your body tighten? When do your thoughts spiral? Where do you feel the pressure to defend, explain, fix? In those moments, give yourself one sentence. I don't need to respond right now. That sentence is a shield. It doesn't mean you won't respond. It just means you won't do it on someone else's timeline. Let others run. You walk. Let others project. You reflect. Let others provoke. You preserve. Not because you're above them, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself for the sake of appearances. In time, people will notice. They'll see how calm unsettles chaos. They'll wonder why they can't trigger you the way they used to. Some might call it arrogance. Let them. You'll know it for what it truly is, composure. And in that composure, you'll find something rare. Not indifference, but freedom. You'll discover how much of your past turmoil was never about the world, but about your inability to pause long enough to hear your own thoughts above the noise. So now, you pause, you breathe, you choose. You observe the storm and realize it doesn't belong to you. You let it pass, like the weather. And when it does, you're still here, still grounded, still whole. And that quietly becomes your greatest strength. 6. Emotional manipulation is common and avoidable. The fisherman doesn't shout when he casts a line. He waits, still, silent, while the bait does the work. Emotional manipulation works the same way. It doesn't always arrive with volume or rage. Sometimes it's a sigh, a pause, a well-placed, I guess you don't care. And just like that, the hook is set. You feel the pull, guilt, obligation, confusion, and suddenly you're swimming in someone else's current, trying to explain yourself, prove your care, fix a problem that was never yours to carry. And the more you thrash, the deeper you're tangled. Most people don't even realize they're being baited. That's the power of subtle manipulation. It wears the face of love, of loyalty, even of vulnerability. But look closer and you'll find a pattern. Someone else's discomfort becomes your burden. Their silence becomes your panic. Their shifting moods become your responsibility. And if you're not careful, your entire emotional rhythm gets hijacked by people who never learned how to regulate their own. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness, because the Stoics never taught us to harden, they taught us to discern. Epictetus wrote, "When someone provokes you, realize that it is your own opinion that provokes you," meaning the hook only works if you bite, the guilt only works if you accept it, the chaos only spreads if you let it in. When you see this clearly, manipulation loses its power. Not because it disappears, but because you stop feeding it. I once watched a man unravel over a 3-word text, "Do what you want." He read it 10 times, replayed every recent conversation in his head, tried to decode the tone, the subtext, the hidden signal. He even called a friend to ask, "Do you think she's upset?" But the truth was simpler and harder to accept. He wasn't reacting to the words. He was reacting to the emotional leash they carried, the unspoken demand that he'd guess correctly, that he'd prove his loyalty through guilt. That moment marked a shift. He didn't reply, not out of defiance, but out of clarity. He finally saw the game and he stopped playing. Emotional manipulation often hides behind good intentions. "I'm just being honest. I didn't mean it that way. You're too sensitive." These aren't always lies, but they're often shields. Shields that protect someone's inability to own their own emotions while shifting the burden to you. But your peace is not a negotiation tool. It's not a bargaining chip in someone else's drama. It's yours. And that means you get to decide where your energy goes. Seneca reminded us that no man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. Adversity isn't just external, it's emotional. And sometimes, the courage to face it comes not from confrontation, but from refusal. The refusal to engage in guilt tripping. The refusal to over-explain. The refusal to let someone else write your emotional script. You are not required to feel bad just because someone else is uncomfortable. You are not cruel for needing space. You are not cold for declining to carry emotions that weren't handed to you with consent. And you are not broken for being tired of dancing to the rhythm of someone else's instant stability. Practical application begins with noticing. When you feel suddenly anxious in a conversation, pause. Ask yourself, is this mine? When you find yourself apologizing for things that feel vague or untrue, step back. Ask, am I being blamed for their feelings? And when you're tempted to react just to make the tension go away, breathe. Choose not to perform. You don't owe anyone a performance of peace while they stir conflict. You don't owe a response to emotional bait. You don't owe access to your calm to people addicted to their own storms. You owe yourself discernment. The discernment to know when presence becomes a prison. The strength to leave a narrative that demands your exhaustion. And the courage to say no. Not with anger, but with stillness. This is not detachment. This is sovereignty. The kind Marcus Aurelius practiced when he wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change. But that person must convince me, not by shouting, but by reason." This is what emotional maturity looks like. Clarity without cruelty. Boundaries without bitterness. Strength without spectacle. And when you begin living from that space, manipulation no longer finds purchase. It slips, it fizzles, it fades. Because you are no longer playing the role they wrote for you. You are no longer their mirror. You are your own anchor. And in that quiet stance, you become unshakable. Not because you win, but because you no longer need to play. 7. Detachment isn't cold, it's clean. Imagine standing in the middle of a crowded marketplace. Voices shouting, offers flying, people pulling at your sleeves, demanding attention. That's what your mind becomes when you let every opinion, every expectation, every emotion from the outside world take root inside. You become cluttered, not from things, but from noise. You carry weight you can't name. You respond to signals that were never meant for you. And when you finally begin to detach, to step back, to reclaim your inner silence, the world doesn't understand. They call you distant, aloof, changed. But what really changed was the level of access you gave to everything that never truly belonged to you. Detachment in the Stoic sense is not withdrawal. It is precision. It's the art of discerning what deserves your energy, your attention, your inner space, and what simply doesn't. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." That retreat isn't built for escape, it's built from boundaries. You don't stop feeling, you stop leaking. You stop letting every breeze become a storm, every comment become a trigger, every silence become a story. You begin to live from the inside out, not from the outside in. This kind of detachment is misunderstood because we've been trained to equate presence with performance. If you're not reacting, you're not caring. If you're not constantly available, you're emotionally absent. But what if the opposite were true? What if caring too much about everything, about being understood, about proving your intentions, about meeting every unspoken need, is the very thing that's been stealing your peace? The mind, untrained, wants to attach. It wants to identify with every narrative, every opinion, every glance. But the soul, the deeper part, seeks stillness. Not the absence of feeling, but the presence of clarity. And that's what detachment gives you. Not coldness, cleanliness, like wiping the fog off a mirror. You still see what's there. You just stop reacting to the distortions. You'll know this shift when it begins. It starts when you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. When you stop chasing closure from conversations that only echo your own absence. When you can hear a criticism, feel the sting, but choose not to carry it. That's not indifference. That's sovereignty. That's the space where you begin to recognize that not every battle is yours, not every conflict requires your entry, and not every invitation deserves your RSVP. Some will call this detachment a form of numbness. Let them. They are mistaking your silence for lack of care. But silence, when intentional, is not absence, it is alignment. You are no longer reacting for validation. You are no longer available for unnecessary tension. You are no longer participating in stories that keep you small. And in that quiet refusal, you find power. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus reminded his students that our suffering stems not from events, but from our attachment to them. When something happens, the only thing in your power is your attitude toward it. Detachment sharpens that attitude. It strips away the dramatics, the false urgency, the emotional taxation we once paid without question. And in return, it offers stillness, spaciousness, control, not over the world, but over the one thing that ever mattered, your response to it. Practical detachment begins with awareness. Notice where your emotions spike, not because the moment is intense, but because the moment is unfamiliar. Notice where you feel the pull to fix, to react, to prove. And instead of stepping in, breathe. Reframe. Ask, is this mine to hold? More often than not, it isn't. And letting go doesn't make you careless, it makes you clean. You begin to detach not because you don't feel, but because you finally decided that peace is a higher priority than being seen a certain way. You detach from the need to explain, to be liked, to manage others' emotional states. And what fills that space is not distance, it's discipline. A kind of emotional minimalism that allows your energy to flow where it matters. You stop collecting arguments like trophies. You stop assigning meaning to every silence. You stop searching the faces of others to confirm your worth. In that space, something remarkable happens. You return to yourself, untouched by noise, unhooked from chaos, unfazed by roles you no longer need to play. You don't shut down. You show up differently, steady, present, unbothered. And when others ask what changed, you won't have a speech. You'll just smile quietly and say less. Because now you know, detachment isn't a wall, it's a window. And through it, you finally see the world as it is, not as your emotions imagined it to be. And that view is freedom. 8. Peace gets boring, but it's worth it. A man stands alone at dawn, coffee in hand, watching the sky turn gold in complete silence. No phone, no plans, no one to impress. At first it feels empty, unremarkable, almost like something's missing. But the longer he stays in that stillness, the more he realizes nothing's missing, nothing's wrong, it's just quiet. And that quiet, unfamiliar at first, is peace. Not the dramatic kind sold on social media, not a retreat in the mountains or a profound breakthrough, but the steady, subtle absence of noise, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that creeps in only when you've stopped chasing stimulation. Most people don't know what to do when things get calm. When the arguments end, when the chaos quiets, when the adrenaline of conflict fades, they mistake the stillness for a problem. We've been conditioned to associate aliveness with intensity. If life isn't charged, then something must be wrong. But that belief is what keeps us running in emotional circles, forever addicted to the next fix of stress or drama, anything to avoid sitting still with ourselves. Seneca warned, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. That imagination thrives in the absence of silence. When we have nothing to react to, we create something. We overthink. We analyze conversations that are already over. We dig up past wounds just to feel something again. But peace, real peace, doesn't beg for your attention. It simply waits for you to stop resisting it. And when you do, it can feel dull at first. You'll miss the highs. You'll feel the itch to check your phone. You'll reach for something, anything, to disrupt the calm. That's not a flaw. That's withdrawal. You're not bored, you're detoxing from urgency, from overstimulation, from being needed all the time. The silence isn't empty, it's healing. But healing rarely feels exciting. It feels quiet, slow, uneventful, until you realize how long you've lived in chaos, calling it normal. The Stoics knew that a steady life is a virtuous life. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it." That kind of strength doesn't come from noise, it comes from rhythm, from stillness, from repetition, from learning to sit with yourself long enough that presence no longer feels foreign. And once you taste this kind of peace, not a momentary escape, but a sustainable way of being, you begin to rearrange your entire life around it. You no longer chase every conflict to feel important. You no longer seek intensity to feel alive. You start measuring success not by how much you do, but by how little you have to escape from. You stop chasing highs and start protecting your baseline. That baseline, steady, clear, undramatic, is your sanctuary. But to build it, you must give up the addiction to emotional fireworks, the kind of conversations that go in circles, the kind of people who only reach out when they're in crisis, the kind of inner narratives that replay what they said, how you should have responded, what they might think now. Peace requires you to stop participating in things that constantly demand your reaction. Start small. Create 1 hour each day with no inputs, no screens, no conversation, just you. Notice what rises: restlessness, boredom, maybe even discomfort. Let it rise, let it pass. Do nothing heroic, just sit, just be. Over time, you'll notice the chaos loses its appeal. The noise feels like clutter. The tension in your body softens. You begin to hear your own thoughts again. Not the loud ones, the deep ones. The ones that whisper, not shout. The ones that guide, not command. And when the world inevitably returns with its noise, the arguments, the distractions, the pings and buzzes, you won't flinch. You'll move through it like water moves around stone. Because you've made peace, not a place you visit, but a state you return to. And people will notice. Some will be drawn to it. Others may feel threatened by it. Let them. Your job isn't to convince anyone of your peace. It's to live it. Eventually, the boredom fades. What felt dull becomes sacred. What felt empty becomes full. What once needed volume to feel meaningful now feels complete in silence. That's when you know you've stepped into something most never find. Not because it's hidden, but because it's quiet. And in a world that shouts, you choose stillness. You chose clarity. You chose peace. And not just any peace. The kind that's quiet enough to keep, strong enough to last, and deep enough to change the way you see everything. Peace isn't earned through noise. It's built in silence, protected by discipline, and strengthened by what you choose not to react to. In a world that thrives on overthinking, overstimulation, and emotional chaos, learning to care less isn't indifference, it's self-mastery. When you reclaim your attention, detach from what doesn't grow you, and stop chasing every fleeting emotion, you begin to live as the Stoics intended, rooted, clear, and unshaken. You don't have to explain your peace, you just have to live it. Boundaries, presence, and emotional discipline. These are not cold habits, they are warm forms of self-respect. When you practice emotional minimalism and let go of unnecessary attachments, you stop leaking energy. You begin protecting your mental clarity like sacred ground. Let this be a reminder. Your emotional freedom is your responsibility. Nobody else can give it to you, and no one has the right to take it away. Each day, ask yourself what deserves your energy, what's truly in your control, and what you're willing to release. Train your mind not to flinch at discomfort, but to pause, observe, and choose with wisdom. Start today. Practice stillness, respond less, observe more, focus only on what aligns with your values. The less you react, the more you begin to see. The less you explain, the more you reclaim. And the less you care about the noise, the drama, the endless pressure to please, the freer and happier you become. If any part of this resonated with you, I invite you to share your story in the comments below. Let's create a space where silence is strength, clarity is power, and peace, the deep, sustaining kind, becomes our collective pursuit.